Good morning, everybody. Thank you. That's much better. It's much nicer if we do things that way. It's also because this session needs to be interactive. Delighted. I'll say who I am first. Andrew Jacobs, Organisational Learning and Talent Manager for the London Borough of Lewisham, public sector hero. Delighted to be able to introduce two non-experts, two non-sages on the stage, two non-gurus, but two guys who I have an enormous amount of respect for, particularly on this kind of stuff. So Steve Wheeler and Dave Kelly. I said about being interactive because this session is interactive. I think we've got a total of about 6 slides, which the guys have got to show you. And actually, the rest of it is them discussing with you some of the specific questions which were posed in the brochure, which went out in relation to what the session is. So there were some key points. I've taken some soundings from people who I knew were going to be coming to the session as well. I'll be looking at the Twitter back channel as well to see what questions there are. We'll be asking you as a group to be involved in some of these questions and so on as well. It also does come off of the keynote that we've seen this morning. And there's particularly some stuff around ethics, around some of the stuff that the guys are going to be talking about, which we're going to be picking up. First of all, I'd like to start with you, Steve, if we can. If you can just explain to us, why do you think this stuff is coming up again now? Why are we still having these conversations about the now and next in technology?
I think those who were in Rohit's keynote earlier on, were you all there? Did you all see it? He made a lot of important points about being human. And I think that a lot of technology that is emerging today, it doesn't actually threaten that, but it does challenge what it means to be human. So we have to rethink who we are, what we're trying to do as professionals, as human beings. And I think a lot of the new technology, we talk about the grain technologies, the 5 areas, the 5 things that we'll see in the future: genetics, robotics, artificial intelligence, informatics, and nanotechnology. Those are the 5 big ones that we talk about as the future of technology. And each of those in their own way has this kind of propensity to challenge who we are as a human. So that's why I think we want to discuss it, why we need to discuss it, why we need to discuss things like the moral, legal, ethical issues, which I think lag behind when technology pushes forward so fast. And that's, I think, one of my concerns as well.
Thank you. Dave, can you just give us a brief outline on a particular perspective around the future of L&D in relation to some of this new technology that's coming out?
Sure. So one of the things that's interesting about this conversation, when I was invited to participate in it, we were discussing what format we should use, and through email, Steve sent me an email saying, why don't we do a debate? And I typed in, that sounds like a great idea, while my mind was going, run, you fool, run. But what was interesting was one of the comments that was very interesting came from my wife. She said, how are you going to debate? Aren't you guys kind of on the same page in terms of where you come from? And I said, well, yeah, but whatever, as a general thing, even though we're on the same page, if one of us says something out, the other one will naturally try and, whatever one says, the other one will just find a way to disagree and provide another thing. And she's like, oh, so it's going to be like being married to you. But in terms of where I see L&D going, one of the things that I find fascinating, and coming out of that keynote this morning, you're hearing about all these different things and how the world around us is changing. But L&D is slower to change. One of the challenges I think we have within our industry is we have a very strongly ingrained habit of shoehorning existing methodologies into new technologies. We don't look at how the world is changing around us and say, what does it mean? We kind of say, how do I do what I do through these new technologies? We don't look at the new technologies and say, how does this change what I do? And I kind of feel like the world is changing so rapidly that we're not going to get away with that anymore. And that, to me, a phrase I often use is, if you want to see how technology is changing the way that we learn, you don't look at education. You look at life. If you want to see how technology is going to change how we learn, you look at how technology is changing how we live. And I think we saw a lot of that in this morning's keynote.
But Dave, I already take issue with you on one thing you've just said. You said that L&D is very slow to change. It might be slow to change, but that's relative. If you've worked in higher education like I have, you know that higher ed drags its heels a lot, and so does the school system in many ways because of all the high stakes testing that's going on. So I think L&D is in the prime position to innovate, and you are forging ahead a lot quicker than a lot of the compulsory and post-16 schools sector, education sector. So I think that you people in the room here, you have the opportunity to break new ground, and you're going to do it better than the universities will.
That's a bit scary.
Well, it is, but it's a challenge. You know, I've just done 20 years in higher ed, just left it, just walked away from it, and it's bound up with a lot more bureaucracy than you'll know that L&D is.
Well, and as we start getting into some of the questions that we had posed, and as Andrew said, I encourage you guys to chime in with thoughts and anything that you disagree with what we be saying, please chime in. Think about how you live your life, because if we've all been at that dinner party where everyone's having a conversation and someone asks a question and everyone looks around the table and goes, I don't know. Within 3 seconds, what does someone at the table do? Pulls out their phone and says, I'm going to Google it. Nobody at the table in the history of mankind has ever said, you know, that's a great question. Let me pull out my phone and log into the LMS to get the answer. And that's not a criticism of the LMS. It's just, that's just how our human behavior is changing. And I think we have to adapt to that.
There's an issue with Googling things. Let me pull this to pieces, because we rely too much, I think, on Google. We rely too much on search engines. I was in a meeting with some anatomy and physiology specialists down in Auckland University of Technology in November. I'll tell you this story very quickly. And there were about 8 of them around the table. 2 of them were actually medical doctors. The rest were nurses or physiotherapists and occupational therapists. And they came in as anatomy and physiology experts. And they sat around the table with me, and I said, what's your issue? And they said, we have a problem with engagement. We have 2,000 students in our cohorts. They come in 300 at a time in a room like this, and we sit there and we instruct them for 2 hours, and then they go off and they try and remember what we've instructed them. And I said, well, are you surprised that they're not engaged? The first session, everyone turns up. The second session, they get about half there, and by the third session, there's about 30 people in the room. And I said, have you ever considered that there are challenges that you can give the students that are ungoogleable? That you cannot search for. And so they said, well, give us one. And I said, well, okay, you're anatomy and physiology experts. Let me give you an ungoogleable question. You see if you can Google it. What is there exactly 5 of in the human body, the normal human body? And they said, that's easy, it's fingers. I said, no, you've got 10. 20, you know, if you count the digits on your fingers, your toes as well. And then they said 5 senses. I said, no, actually, there's about 32 senses if you look at them all. And your anatomy and physiology. So they started to get really, irked at this. And after a while, they gave up and they started Googling it. And they couldn't Google it. Try it yourself if you like. And there will be people in the room that will try it. But nobody could work out. And these are the anatomy and physiology specialists in New Zealand. They're top people. And so in the end, I gave them the solution, and they kicked themselves. It's 5 lobes of the lung. You've got 3 one side, 2 the other. And you see, that's a gateway question into engagement of learning, where you start to then think, okay, why are there 3 lobes on one side and 2 on the other? And then you know that the heart is inclined slightly to the left. And then you ask the question, okay, why is the heart slightly inclined to the left? And students become engaged naturally, because you've given them a challenge instead of direct instruction. So for me, Google can get in the way, but sometimes it can enhance learning. Sometimes it can inhibit learning.
Oh, absolutely. I totally.
You're not supposed to agree with me.
I'm not allowed to agree. Sorry, broke the rules already. Well, I feel like we could just sit here and just riff off each other first time, but I know we have some specific questions that we wanted to get into.
Let's have a look at our first one. So the first question that Dave and I and Steve talked about is this one here.
Ooh.
Steve?
Do you want me to go first?
Please.
I'm on the side of augmented reality for a number of reasons. I've already written about this previously. I was at the BET show last week, and I was using the HTC Vive. Has anyone used that? It's totally immersive. You have a pair of goggles that you wear, and you have a headset as well. So you're being fed audio and visual all the time, and it's 3-dimensional. You can move around the object that you're rendering. You've got 2 wands to actually work with. It's very cumbersome. And for me, it also has the potential for a lot of, threat, danger. What happens if there's a fire in the room or something? Just a prosaic thing. What happens if there's a fire in the room and you don't hear it, or you don't see it because you're immersed in the technology? I prefer the augmented reality tool for that reason, because it's less invasive. You're using it through your phone. It also looks less weird. Remember the Google Glass? I mean, Dave, I think you demonstrated this.
I look like a fool.
It looks stupid. Let's face it. And you don't want to walk out into the street looking like that. But doing that is not so bad, and it's not obtrusive, and you're seeing information of the real world, imposed upon what you're seeing through your camera. And for me, that is a much better way of harnessing the power of that kind of technology. So for me, it's AR all the way.
I tend to lean more towards VR, as you might expect based on the structure here, for a couple of different reasons. One, and I think language is important here. One is we're talking about the context of VR these technologies being used in learning. And you mentioned the awkwardness of the tech. I think that we're going to get over the physical awkwardness of the tech in both the VR and the AR space fairly quickly. I mean, in the VR space, the tethers are going to go away this year with Oculus Go and some of the other mainstream technologies that are going to be out there. But in terms of the usage of it, I think VR serves a very definitive purpose. The VR-AR conversation gets a little muddied, that people tend to blur the lines between the two. And I think we're better served to really recognize the unique affordances of each. And in terms of being able to take something like high risk, where the literally in training, the difference between succeeding and failing in the task is life or death. VR is a very unique solution to that. I've seen a lot of unique applications of VR in the area of firefighting, where you can teach a firefighter how to deal with incredibly dangerous situations in a completely safe environment. It is a unique device. You are literally blocking out the world around you so that you can go someplace else. But anytime you have a high-risk situation or a situation that is extremely difficult to replicate in real life, one of the really interesting applications I've seen stateside is from Walmart. Walmart is using virtual reality to replicate Black Friday sales. In the United States, we have Black Friday the day after Thanksgiving, where everyone goes nuts and spends all their money for no apparent reason. And in Walmart, they've had a number of different incidences where there's just a stampede into their stores. And people have literally been killed in this stampede into their stores. So they've set up an application in VR where you don't know what that's going to be like. You can have people describe it to you as much as you want in a training room and say, this is what it's going to be like, it's going to be hectic, it's going to be dangerous, it's going to be scary. And you don't appreciate that until you experience it. VR gives the associates the ability to experience that crush of Black Friday in a completely safe environment. And it does prepare them in ways that other tools would not. So I'm pretty bullish on the potential for virtual reality.
I would agree.
Stop you for a second, Steve. Yeah. I'm just interested from an audience perspective. Do you have a preference, VR or AR? If you think you have a preference for VR, can you just put your hands up for us, please? Okay. And if you have a preference for AR? And if you have no preference at all?
Can I take it from that some of you would prefer both or either, depending on the context?
Both?
I think
yeah.
Is there
people
decision.
who would like to use both?
And I think that makes sense. I mean, ultimately, it depends on what problem you're looking to solve.
Yeah, I was going to say, I agree, Dave, about the idea that VR has applications for things like simulations, where you're immersing in a context where you can interact with your environment directly, using either the wands or gloves or treadmills or whatever. I mean, there's a lot of different VR tools out there. But what about the expense of it? I mean, AR. A lot of the apps are free. You download them. You bring your own device to work, and you're using it in the live context. There's a lot more expense associated with VR, isn't there?
There's definitely more expense. I think that there's a bit of flattening associated with that. But again, the use cases that I'm seeing in VR, it justifies that expense. I mean, when you look at some of the stuff that's going on in the simulation field, especially in the medical field, to give people the opportunity to practice surgery. I've seen a lot of applications where they're literally practicing surgery in a VR. Granted, I would prefer that someone had done something a little bit more than VR before they operate on me. Yeah. But there are huge applications to that. The other thing I would say is when it comes to, from the AR perspective, as much as we are seeing a lot of huge applications of AR through these devices, AR does not excite me through this device. Because where AR really excites me is in the wearable tech space. Because I can use this and it can give me some contextual information that's really exciting, but I can't do anything with it because I have this in my hand. AR to me doesn't really get too exciting until I'm getting this. That's one of the things, as much as I look like a fool with Google Glass, I enjoyed with it as much as the experiment that I'm enjoying seeing that it's now an enterprise edition that is in manufacturing, because that's where the potential is to me, where I've got this augmented reality overlay that is giving me contextual information to what I'm looking at, but I still have my hands free to do something with it. And long term, I do think AR is probably going to have more applications to help people solve problems than virtual reality, but I still think in the context of teaching someone, especially now, in the context of teaching someone something unique, VR has a very unique application.
I've had a couple of questions through Twitter, but see if there's any questions from the audience here in the first instance.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I'm going to be very basic. I know the VR. I'm not so clear about augmented reality. What it's used for. I try to VR. Could you be more specific?
Okay, just for the purpose of everybody, so the question is the lady's familiar with VR, but not necessarily AR, understands VR, has seen VR in practice, but not augmented reality. So effectively, what is it?
Well, augmented reality is basically, essentially a tool that you can download onto your phone. It uses the camera through your phone to give you an image on the screen of the real world around you, and then it overlays content onto it. So let's say a practical problem. You're walking down a high street in London and you don't know where the nearest tube station is. So you invoke your augmented reality, and as you move your phone around, it shows you where the nearest tube station is and how close you are to it. And as it gets bigger, you're closer to it. So it's as simple as that.
Question?
Well, the question is about potential. Both of you talked about things that are being used right now with VR and AR. So what for you is the most exciting thing that might happen with AR and VR in the future that really sells that technology?
Okay, so the question is we're talking about what's being used now, but actually what's the most exciting thing for Dave and Steve in the future for each of these? Who'd like to go first?
Okay, well, for me, it's a little bit science fiction now, but the technology already exists, and that is direct retinal projection. We know we can do it, but it's now making the technology accessible and affordable, I think, and also usable in the right context, because it takes a bit of skill. It's a bit like Google Glass. There was a bit of skill involved in it, wasn't there? To actually be able to blink your eye or touch the side to actually invoke what you wanted it to do. And so it takes a bit of using. But I think direct retinal projection will actually bring us what I call mixed reality, where you get the best of both worlds. And so then, therefore, this question then becomes redundant, because you're using the best features of VR and AR combined.
I would add first off, contextually, what is future? I mean, because what we've talked about right now is 10, 20 years out for some people in this room. And that's not right or wrong, that's just putting technology into the context of how you're using it in your organization. But in terms of me, who's following this and is in this field for two major reasons. One, I like the work that we do, and I think we can help a lot of people. And two, it gives me the opportunity to buy things and go home and tell my wife that it's research. So I get excited about some of the stuff that I see in the VR space that is getting closer to what Steve mentioned about mixed reality. For instance, I went into, while I was doing research in Orlando recently, I went to a place called The Void. And what they have is a total mixed reality, virtual reality standpoint, where you're not tethered to anything. You're wearing a backpack, you're wearing tactical suits, and you're literally walking around an environment that is just basically closet space, but they have and doors that open, and you can walk around a virtual environment. For those of you that are Star Wars geeks, it's a Star Wars environment. You experience a Star Wars story, but you're walking around. And even something as simple as when we were doing the tech thing, they say, all right, put the headset on. Can you see the other players that are in the room with you? Yes. Look down. Can you see your hands? And I did. I wasn't holding wands. I wasn't wearing gloves. and I saw my hands in this virtual environment, and that was transformative to me.
So how does that work? What technology is involved?
What's really interesting, I did notice on the front of it that there were cameras, so I'm assuming that. But I was actually, when I went there, I told them I was going to write an article about it, which I'm still working on. And I asked, am I allowed to take pictures for this article? And they allowed me. They were very specific. They said you could take as many pictures as you want. You just can't take close-up pictures of the tech because it is so proprietary to them. Yeah. But I did notice on the front of the visor that there were cameras on the front of it, which I assume was just capturing.
Right. Okay. I'm going to move us on to the next question. There have been some questions on Twitter. What I will do is I'll ping them off to Steve and Dave so that they can see they've come through as well. Sure. Particularly one challenging about whether the VR for Walmart is actually a learning technology, but we'll come back to that one.
Sure.
If you want to see, is there anybody here from KFC?
Chicken.
If you want to see virtual reality done very badly, I suggest you go and look on YouTube and look up their virtual reality teaching people how to do the chicken.
Would you have said that if there were KFC reps here?
I would have asked them who signed it off. But would suggest have a look at that after. So, interesting, I'm going to ask the audience first. If you agree that artificial intelligence will transform learning as we know it, can you please raise your hands? And if you disagree? Ooh, not many people. Dave?
Over there.
I'm gonna let Steve go first, simply because I don't remember what side I agreed to take on it.
You've probably gathered now we're role-playing this a bit. So,
the audience is on your side.
I'm going to take the perspective that AI will not necessarily transform learning as we know it. And there's a number of reasons for that. One is that we learn anyway, whatever happens. We are learning machines, if you like. We have our own intelligence, and we can use it to make decisions, to spot patterns, and there's nothing better than the human brain for doing that. All we're doing with AI is it's a very, very poor shadow of human intelligence that we're trying to create using machines. And I'll tell you, one of the reasons why AI and why people like Ray Kurzweil are completely wrong with things like the singularity. You know what the singularity is? It's where computers will become more intelligent than human beings. So our creation actually becomes greater than the creator. So I'll tell you why he's wrong. There's one simple reason why he's wrong and why AI will never, ever surpass the human intelligence. And that is because human beings can make mistakes and learn from them. And also, we break the rules. Computers can't break rules. Computers are rule-bound. They are algorithmically bound to follow instructions. And if you tell them to break a rule, then that's still an instruction. But we can break rules. And when I was listening to Rohit earlier on today speaking, he was mentioning about these great big data sets that computers and AI actually kind of dips into to actually make decisions based on predictable pathways and patterns. And I thought for a minute, whatever new technologies come along, there are always the Luddites. There are always those who will come in and subvert it. So what happened if a whole load of us subverted it by behaving unpredictably on purpose? What would happen to the patterns then? It would disrupt them completely. And so for me, AI it's just one of the possible solutions. On its own, it's not going to transform learning.
So, two aspects to this. One is, I push back a little bit on the idea that AI will never do what you were describing, for a couple of reasons. One is we don't know where technology is going to go. There are a lot of things that I think 20 years ago, 50 years ago, we would say would never happen. You'd never be able to walk around with technology in your pocket that is more powerful than what you have on your desk. People would probably have said that 30 years ago. The science of how AI could do something, a lot of people say, well, if a computer could do that, it would be like magic to be like a human. Well, magic is nothing more than science that we don't understand yet. So I could see it, just because it's not there today, I don't think necessarily it's not going to be there tomorrow. I don't know if it's necessarily going to be our lifetime, maybe our children's lifetime, but I think AI could surpass us. But in terms of this particular question, will AI change the way that we mean learning. Learning is a pretty broadly used term. So in terms of the language of what we mean by learning in and of itself, the activities of learning or the cognitive aspect. The cognitive aspect of what it means to learn, I don't know if AI is necessarily going to change that. But the activities around what learning means, I think AI is definitely going to be changing that. There are things today, the stuff that we do around learning activities that are really more about knowledge gain and memorization that is going to be offloaded, which will enable us to focus more of our attention on the problem-solving aspect of it, which that excites me very much. I don't see a world, at least in our lifetimes, where computers are going to replace all of the problem-solving aspects of what we do as human beings, but the stuff that we do, the blinders that are that big that we give people at orientation to memorize, I can see a lot of that just being offloaded because we don't need to worry about that anymore. But and that to me will change the activities of what it means to learn, and it will definitely change the activities of the people in this room who have to support what people need to learn about.
So Dave, could you give me one example right now of where AI has transformed learning for a lot of people?
Where it has?
Yeah, already.
It's a good question.
I'll throw it open to the audience as well.
Anyone? Anyone in the room? People at the back over there.
Yeah.
So, in the financial services space, a few years ago, there was the advent of robo-advice, where it's effectively a computer is choosing an asset allocation set for an investor and then investments to go along with that. So, if I'm new to the financial advisor world, that's something I no longer have to learn because there's a robot doing it for me. I can focus on other aspects of the job instead.
Did you all hear that? So there's a robot actually analysing data sets. Yeah, another example?
One.
Oh,
go ahead.
sorry, lady there.
Is Siri or Alexa not versions of artificial intelligence? And have we not?
It's a personal assistant, really. It has a semblance of AI, but it's not strict AI in the kind of the strong sense of the word. You know, strong AI is where it takes the place of the human mind and does elements of, you know, I'm not going to confuse the terms, but there is a notion of cognitive computing as well, which is a kind of like an expert system, a domain expert system, which replaces a part of your thought processes. And for me, I think that's quite dangerous.
Sorry, another hand there.
Yeah.
Predictive analytics in assessing the kind of paths learners take via online learning and attendance monitoring and pointing out learners who are at risk and therefore need intervention. So in a way that we can't do because we don't get to see those students as much, to get the interaction with them. We need to do that with predictive analytics.
Yeah, but predictive analytics, the big data aspect I mentioned earlier on about, you know, this disruptive elements, you know, outliers, if you like, there's a danger there of marginalizing a small minority of students who will be disadvantaged because of that data set. So where's the ethics in that?
One of the things I would add, and it's not an organizational learning thing, but there are definitive parallels. You go back in time to Jeopardy a couple of years ago, where they had the best Jeopardy players ever battle IBM Watson.
Yeah.
And that was AI showing that I can find an answer with a reasonable amount of certainty faster than a human ever could. And I was watching that, and everyone was just like, "Wow, this is incredible." And all I was thinking was, "My goodness, the applications for an organization to do this." We used to live in a world where the person who knew the most was the most valuable. Now we're moving to an environment where we are quickly moving from an environment where it used to be the person who knew the most was the most valuable. Then it became the person who could find it the quickest was. Now we're finding that machines can do that quicker than any human can. So it's changing workflows within an organization.
But the skeptical view on that would be that this is still an expert system. Watson can do specific things very well, but try and match it in a kickboxing match, and you'll win every time. It's just you know. Let me take this on a step further. Let's talk about creativity. There was a debate earlier on between Rohit and somebody in the audience about you know, vinyl discs against digitally kind of created or computer-created music, and I think we'd all agree that computer-generated music has less nuance to it than human music that is expressing someone's creativity, someone's desires, someone's emotions. And I know that there are computer experts out there. They've been doing it for the last 20 years, trying to model emotions within computers to try and help them to respond in a more human way. But they haven't cracked it yet.
No.
And I think, you know, I wouldn't say they'll never do it, but I think it's a very, very long way off. So the idea of creativity, which is a very, very human emotion, it has to come into learning in a very real way. You've seen your learners, no doubt, take creative solutions. They do that because they're human. They do that because they see a human connection there, or an emotional connection there. If we replace that with AI and try and make that work, I think we're heading for disaster. That's the view that is anti-AI.
Gentleman there with his hand up.
Example for AI helping learning and transforming is intelligent tutoring systems. They use adaptive learning. They change the way that they teach based on the students' or learner behavior, based on the responses, based on their actions. So AI will help them to find the paths they adapt the learning for them. So AI could replace the teachers, could replace humans in this way.
I'm really interested that we had so many people put their hand up and said, yes, it is going to change, but we actually haven't been able to find that many examples of how it's changing it now. So why are we so confident about how it's going to change in the future? Why are we so confident about it?
One guy there.
Sorry. Who had the hand up?
I think actually we see a lot of examples today, we just don't recognize them as AI.
Okay.
Take for instance, the LMS that has shown you the learning that is relevant for you right now. That's a basic form of AI already.
Okay, so we're seeing examples, right, yeah. So we see examples of AI, we're not recognizing them. Example is like an LMS, which is recommending different training learning
I think we've
activities.
got to be careful though when we start to ascribe very low technology as AI. You know, the pure AI specialist would say no, it's not. It's a form of technology that is pattern matching and gathering data, but it's not AI in its real sense. AI is when it actually starts to replace human thinking, when it starts to replace the processes of reasoning and decision making. And that's where we start to get into the really murky stuff. So I take your point about, you know, intelligent tutor systems, but again, we still have to come back to the ethical and moral issues about, you know, who is it actually marginalizing? What about the digital divide? Who is actually not going to benefit from this and will never benefit from it?
And as much as we're supposed to be on contrarian sides here, I think that the murkiness of this is an important enough thing that we should get on the same page. This is going to push us into areas where we have to worry about how the technology is being used. You know, any technology that has tremendous opportunities for us also creates tremendous risk. Generally thinking, I mean, any technology that comes out, you always have to kind of look at it and say, well, how to overly dramatize it? How could this technology be used for good, but how could it also be used for evil? And AI is a technology that we always have to kind of have our eye on it and say, wow, this is great, we could do all these different things, but we have to look at who's not being forgotten and what are the risks associated with giving up a certain layer of control as a human being.
If you're more interested in VR, AR and AI, the further sessions in this room here today, so after lunch and then the afternoon session, are built on that. So if you do have a particular interest in it, there'll be more on those later today. Let's move to our next question. Does disruption caused by technology cause transformation or inertia?
I'll let you start on that one.
Is it me again? Right.
Dave's quite
Okay.
happy to cede this to you.
All right. I'm going to get up at this point and move around because I have a couple of slides that I prepared to try and answer this question. And this is a model of disruptive innovation that I've been working on recently that kind of bases itself on the work of Rogers, Everett Rogers' work from around about the 1950s, I think it was, the diffusion of innovations model. Is anyone familiar with that? Some of you, maybe? No one?
If not, please,
well,
you can find it on Amazon. I
Let me
highly
try and
recommend it.
elaborate, and then what I'll try and do is, once I've elaborated, maybe, whoops, my microphone is falling out. What I'll try and do then is try and elaborate, and then you can come back on me with. You look at four stages here. So you've got two axes. The impetus of the change axis here, and up here you've got the degree of discomfort. Now, you could call that an organisational discomfort, or you can call it societal discomfort, or even an individual's discomfort. It's the amount of disruption that's going to happen. So, we start off with the place of no change, or constantly doing what you've always done. And Einstein, I think, once said that the sign of madness is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. It's not going to happen. So inertia is what some companies are involved in right now. They cannot see that there's going to be change coming, and therefore they don't adapt to it, or they're not agile enough to respond quickly enough. The next stage is to iterate, to make changes that improve something that's happening in your organization. Okay, so that kind of speaks for itself. So iteration happens in a lot of organizations. You may be representing, or, kind of recognizing that as being represented in your own organization right now. Now we start to get into the really interesting stuff where you start to innovate, where you start to do new things that create new outcomes, new actions that create new outcomes. Something that's not possibly been done before, or that's been done in the same way, and suddenly you're doing it in a new way. Maybe you're bringing in a new technology or a new method or whatever. And this is the final section here, the final kind of phase, which very, very few companies actually get to. Not firstly, anyway. There are some that have done this, is the disruption stage, where changes are made that make everything that you've previously done obsolete. Now, here's where I bring in the work of another guy, Kevin Burden from Hull University. He talks about an innovation or transformation event horizon, which is the point that your company or yourself gets to, which is a point of no return. You don't want to go back to what you did before because you're doing something new now, and it's actually paying off. It may be cost effective, it may be disrupting the whole market, you may be cornering the market because of what your company's done. But I'm putting it down here, there's also a danger that too much disruption, too quickly, can lead you back to inertia again. And there's the caveat. This is what we've all got to be careful of, both as individuals and as companies, organizations, and society, that if we over-disrupt, there's a kickback, there's a payback, and it will tend to fall back to inertia. So there's my opening gambit.
When Steve reached out to me and said, I think some of the stuff I've been doing, this model, might be appropriate for this question, can you add these? And as I was putting this into PowerPoint last night, I thought, he is quite literally stacking the deck. But I don't necessarily, I think the model definitely works. And as I thought about my response to this question, it's interesting, I saw when I was just looking, I saw some of the tweets during the session, and I saw one from Amy. I don't know what the particular question was, but it says, doesn't it matter, doesn't the context matter? And that's why for me, the answer here about transformation or inertia, it depends. It depends on a lot of different factors. Context is huge. What works, what is going to drive innovation in one organization is going to scare the hell out of another and make them just stand still. Where you are within your environment, what your organizational culture is. I say very often, I probably said it 2 or 3 times here today, that context matters a lot. And there's a maturity model that you can look at in terms of your technological applications within your organization. And that's not necessarily right, wrong, or indifferent. It's just what works for your organization and what you need to do to move forward. So you have to be very aware of where your organization is to determine whether or not pushing something new is going to be something that is going to push them forward or just make them slow down even further.
I'm interested in technology innovations, in particular in relation to learning, because I look at that and I do wonder, well, actually, do we stop at the iteration stage? Do we actually innovate? Or are we too beholden to the way that we've behaved in the past? Putting people in classrooms, keep being a governor or a gatekeeper for learning, that we don't allow these things to happen.
That may be the very reason that some of us never reach innovation level. I suppose another name for that axis going up there could be courage level, Is it about courage? Is it about organizational courage to actually reach out and do something different and disrupt that's never been done before and take that huge risk that it might fail? If you don't, you end up with inertia anyway, so it's a no-win situation. So we've got to move forward, but how fast and to what level, to what extent do we move forward? That's a big question. I'd be interested in the audience's view.
I have a
Okay, so the question is how can companies actually take into account and keep pace with the change of technology, because the technological change is happening too quickly. I mean, I recognise this one from my work. You know, new technology comes in, but time it takes us to bring it in and implement it. There's a new technology coming in. I understand entirely.
I think part of it is not being distracted by the shiny object. I mean, there are so many new technologies that are out there that it's very, very easy to just say, "Ooh, this is new, and it was the biggest thing at the Consumer Electronics Show. We got to get on that." That's a big risk, and companies make that mistake all the time. For me, the basic question that I always encourage organizations to look at when it comes to a new technology is, when you're deciding whether or not you want to use this, the question you need to ask yourself is, what problem is this technology going to solve that I can't solve today? If you can't answer that question, then why would you spend the money?
I think too many organizations see a new shiny technology and go, wow, that's really sexy. We've got to get that before everyone else does. And then they buy it, and then they think, okay, now we've got it. What do we do with it? And it's back to front. The solution comes after the problem. You should identify the problems first in your organization, and then try and buy into a technology that you think might solve that problem. Or, if the technology doesn't solve that problem, then don't buy it. I'm now a director of my own company, but I'm also a major shareholder in a new edtech startup company as well. And in both of those instances, we are dealing primarily with people. And people is what the company's about. It's not the technology that the company's about. That's the end product or the selling point. But the actual company itself is made up of the people. If we don't look after the people first, what are we doing?
Can I just ask, how did that help the people who work for Blockbuster or Kodak?
Well, Blockbuster had... I've been told this story by several sources. Blockbuster had the chance to buy out Netflix at one point. And they refused because they said there was no future in it.
But if their attitude was looking after their people, and it was keeping the people there, then they were not advocating and supporting the technology, and they were superseded.
It's a good question. There's a fine balance between iteration and innovation. And I think that Blockbuster were iterating. They weren't into the innovation aspect because they were more inward-looking. So it's a fine balance between looking inward and looking outward. I think we've got to look both ways if we're going to cross the road.
Well, and I think to your point, that's a great example. There's two aspects that help that in my mind need to push you forward. There's the awareness of the opportunities that exist ahead of you, and the potential to harness those possibilities. But there's also, and this is the part that I think two people forget, that in order to harness those opportunities, you have to allow yourself to let certain things go. You have to allow yourselves to let go of your safe place. Someone mentioned virtual reality. I'll give you a perfect example of what I mean in virtual reality. I'm playing in that space a lot, and I like to see all the different applications. And there was one, I won't mention the name because what I'm about to say is not positive, but there was this course that was, there was this learning application that was out there that you could learn from Neil deGrasse Tyson in VR. And he was involved, and I was like, oh, I'm a big Neil deGrasse Tyson fan. I would love to learn on this. And I loaded the application, I put it on, and I was in a room like this in VR. And I could use the VR to select any different seat that I want to get the preferred seat that I want. And then I would hit start. And I saw Neil deGrasse Tyson come on stage, walk around with a PowerPoint behind him. And I thought, I'm out, because that was someone who was using VR in a way that they couldn't let go of the world that they knew. They just replicated the world that they are comfortable with in VR. I know that there is going to be probably someone in this room who will, just based on numbers, who will use VR, and I will test out the application, and I will get in, and the first thing I will see is a wall that lists the learning objectives for this particular VR experience. I will find you, and I will stop you.
You have a certain set of skills.
It's interesting you say that, because in the first session this morning, I was really interested in the idea of who would want a bed that could tell them how they're sleeping. Because when I'm sleeping, I don't need the bed to tell me I'm sleeping well. I just didn't see the connection. Sorry, questions? Sorry, yeah.
So I've got two things with this. One is where we sit in organisations, because often the
people looking at this at the top level, and the L&D people are talking to kind of people in the middle who are kind of resisting going out the innovation.
Okay, so summarise the first part of the question. So it's, when we look at it, the organisations, the higher up in the organisation, the top people will see that, whereas the L&D people may not, is one part of it, yeah.
Well, yeah, the middle people.
Oh, the middle people,
Interactive.
in the interactive, yeah, okay.
And I think that a lot of this innovation for us as L&D professionals also comes from our learners and how they are learning outside of the workplace. It kind of drives that from the bottom up.
Yeah, and the innovation comes from people outside as well, yeah, and bottom up, yeah.
So looking outward, as I mentioned before, it's not just looking inward, you have to look outward and see what's coming next and what the influences are, the context of the wider world.
It's the question about Google. How many of the people who work in your organisation Google during the day a solution? A quick show of hands. How many people who work in an organisation offer Excel training courses? Microsoft Excel training courses. First question would be why? Because people demand it.
There's a market, yeah.
That's an interesting question, because there's an expectation that it's offered, but you probably find more people are Googling the answers and watching YouTube videos on how to do Excel than they are from sitting on training courses. Sorry, it's just a personal bugbear of mine. Apologies to anybody who trains in Excel.
That's another question.
Yeah.
I suppose part of it is the same as this lady's. I think the L&D role is perhaps to be a bit of a disruptor anyhow, so that you get the innovation, and that's where they need to be, is actually engaging the two parts. So the people who are at iteration and the people who are up above, and challenging what the business is doing all the time, horizon scanning for the future and cherry picking what's best for their organisation.
Okay,
So they have to be a disruptor in order to get innovation, to keep their company or their organisation active and
So L&D actually have to take on that role of being the disruptors in order to create that innovation around how.
I think a lot of them need to start thinking about that challenging leadership.
You've put your finger on something there, because large organisations, as you know, have lots of different roles within them, but those roles don't always join up, do they? So I might not know what's happening in the office next to me, but I should know, because it's probably going to be vital to the decisions I make next week. So there needs to be a lot more joined up thinking. Now, technology can do that, but we also need the will to actually utilise the technology to create that joined up thinking within a large organisation.
I think there's also, you need to look at the stuff Julian Stodd's been talking about social leadership. You might have the hierarchical authority within the organisation, but have you got the social authority? Do people trust you to be an L&D person who can make things happen and help people learn, or are you just there as part of the process, putting people on training courses and doing what people expect you to do? Are you actually disrupting it, exactly as you say? Joan?
I'm trying to speak up because I think it's quite difficult for people to hear the question.
I'm trying to repeat them, I know, I apologise.
I'm conscious that we haven't got a lot of time left, and I'm actually tweeting on this if you're interested in following. But if you had one thing that you could really push L&D to do that you think would have a major effect on disruption, what might that be?
I would do away with training rooms completely. I know a lot of companies are starting to do this already. I would do away with the tethered nature of learning and computing, because let's take a computer suite for instance. You're giving learners, the employees, the message that this is where computing is done. But we know that's a fallacy. Computing can be done everywhere. It can be done in your pocket. It's ubiquitous now. So the same thing applies to learning. I think that if we say this is the learning room, it's the wrong message for the whole organisation, and we should be opening up learning to any time, any place, anywhere. So that's what I would like to see big organisations do a lot more of. Do away with the training rooms and the situated aspect, the tethered aspect of learning.
I would add, again, context is important. So there are organizations that removing the training room would be catastrophic to what they have. So you have to put that in your own context. For me, I'll oversimplify my answer to it. I think L&D could disrupt organizations they work for and our industry if we just change the paradigm through which we look at our work. And an overly simplified question that I would use to shape that is looking at every single thing that we do and saying, what is the least disruptive way that I can accomplish this goal? We don't look at that. That reflects a lot of the shared space of all the technological changes that are going in. Is that we're in this. I mean, I know we have a buzzword in our industry of microlearning, which I tend to stay away from because I don't like it. But I like the idea. Google's doing a lot of work around this idea of micro moments, where you're looking for specific contextual things where someone has a specific need at a specific moment at a specific time, and how that need can be addressed. The more we look at the work that we do through that lens of what can I do to get this person what they need, when they need it, where they need it, and get out of their way, we're going to be able to play in spaces that we don't play well in today, and it's going to be better positioning us to be an area of support through some of the technologies that are changing the world around us.
Yeah.
As a question to you, you said do away with the training room and tether. That sounds also to me like that's still the element.
No. No,
The question was, do away with the training room, and we do away with the tether. Do we do away with the LMS as well?
Well, the LMS, it depends on how you use it, of course. Learning management systems were designed originally to contain learning, within a walled garden, if you like. Now, for a lot of organizations, that's inappropriate now, because they want to open up what they're doing and make it available to the wider network of their companies or whatever. I know in higher education, it's always been a problem. To have a walled garden, and within it you have to contain all the learning that's done within there. I showed some research yesterday. I was speaking at Greenwich University just across the river here yesterday, and I showed some research that I'd done with 830 students over the last 4 years. And essentially my question to them was, how do you communicate and how do you learn? What technologies do you use? And they had a choice of all, Facebook and Twitter and LinkedIn and all the LMS and face-to-face telephone, the whole lot, text. And it showed that over a period of time, they were gravitating more towards social media. And my conclusion from that is that learners will use the organizational tools when they have to, but they'll use their personal tools when they want to, because that's where their friends are. And it's where the influence is, where your friends, where your colleagues are. So you go where your friends are, and therefore social media and personal tools are more popular to them than the organizational tools like the LMS. I'm not saying do away with it, I'm saying revisit what you're doing with it.
That actually leads us quite nicely into our last question. Oh.
Dave, you take this one first. I've forgotten which side we were arguing on.
I definitely think the smartphones are a tool for performance. They are a tool that is enabling us to, kind of what I was mentioning just a second ago, these micro moments. It enables people to have a support network in front of them to problem solve in the moment. Think about how you use your smartphones today, and just the myriad of different ways that you use your smartphone, and compare that to how, if you're using smartphones in your organization as part of a mobile learning program, compare that to how you're using it there. I would venture to guess that there's a pretty sizable gap. That gap represents opportunity in my mind. A lot of the apps that you're using every single day in your personal life, they're performance-based apps. You might be learning as a part of solving a problem, but they're not necessarily designed around let me help you learn, let me teach you something. Some of them are. But a lot of the apps that you use every day, they're there to help solve a problem for you. They're there to help you perform a task. They're there to help you be a better person in the moment. And I think that the opportunities for us in L&D as it relates to these technologies is to look at these tools through that lens. And Steve's going to disagree with me.
Well, I think there's a false dichotomy here. I think we're asking the wrong question here. There's a blurred line between learning and performance, isn't there, surely? I mean, don't the two naturally... Is there a difference?
I believe if you asked your CEO, yeah. Most of the CEOs in organizations that say they are passionate about learning, I think are lying.
But how can you perform if you don't learn?
There are a number of different tasks, there are a number of different resources that are available that I used to work at a bank. And we had a particular type of a bond that came in that people were redeeming incorrectly every single time it came in. The reason that they were doing it incorrectly is because it came into once a year. Like, it was so infrequent. And they decided they wanted to do training on it. And I said, I'm absolutely not going to do training on it, because there's not a possibility that someone is going to learn that, retain that, and be able to pull it and retrieve it at the time that they need it, because it happens so infrequently. So we put together a job aid so that someone could just reference that at the time. I don't care if they learn how to do that task, because they are doing it it's so infrequent that I just need them to have the resources available to do it at the time.
Well, for me, learning comes before performance. You cannot perform until you learn something new. Then you can perform it, and then you perfect it. You get competent at it. You get to the point where it's unconscious performance, and then you move on again and you learn more to improve that performance. So for me, the smartphone, if we're going to use it for anything, we've got to use it for learning first. I was on the tube yesterday, on the train coming across here from Greenwich, and I looked across, and all around me, everybody was looking like that, and they all had their earbuds in, but there was one guy, and I've got the picture of it to prove it. There was one guy, and he was reading a newspaper. I thought, good for you, mate, you know, because he was a positive deviant in the room, you know, if you like, doing something different. So that for me was innovative in reverse, you know. So I think that the mobile phone, the smartphone can be used for learning in many different ways, but I think we've not got to dismiss the fact that there's all the other media out there as well that are still available to us. And I think that if you've got employees who, or learners who want to learn in that particular way, then you should facilitate that. You should create that desired pathway for them so that they can learn in the way that they prefer.
So I'm going to throw a spanner in the works now. So does everybody, if you have a smartphone, just put your hand up. Okay, so all the people who haven't got a smartphone obviously aren't here because they haven't got the tickets via their mobile.
You haven't asked. Is there anyone without a smartphone?
I think I saw every hand go up. Is there anybody who doesn't have a smartphone?
Right.
Okay. Now, I work in an organisation where there are people who don't have a smartphone. If you make that content and you say, this is available and this is a way for you to learn, are we taking away from those people that opportunity to learn?
Yes, you are, because you're not differentiating. As we say in schools, when you differentiate in a school, you know this, that teachers have to make provision for every child in that room, or every student in the room. So if there's a student with special needs, or if there's a student who's got some kind of cognitive impairment, then you have to make provision for those so that they can still learn, even though they may be behind the other students. So when you're doing that and you're creating just content that's online or just content that's digital, you are, I think, probably breaching some kind of human right.
So does that mean that we still do face-to-face because some people can't access it? Does it mean you still need to do something that can be done on a PC because some people might not be able to access it?
No, I think what it means is you provide other resources for them, because my wife was, several years ago, she was a secondary school teacher, and she gave her group of students, 32 students in the group, they were year 11s, I think. She was doing media studies with them, and she told them to go away and watch a TV program and then come back the next day and write a project on it. And two of the girls in the room, twins they were, they came up to her at the end and they said, "Miss, we can't do that." And she said, "Why not?" They said, "Because our parents don't have a television in the house. For religious reasons, they don't have a television." So she quickly had to think of a differentiated task that would allow those to also take part in the same learning process without having the technology available to them. That's what I mean.
Okay. I would add, and it gets into a very gray area, because it gets into an ethical dilemma to a certain extent. I don't think that I've seen a number of organizations that didn't go down a technological path that because of, well, this small subset of our organization is going to have a problem accessing it. And it was an easy out to, we're not going to do this. For me, it's a matter of what's the best opportunity to support the masses, and those who are going to have a challenge with that, how can we accommodate them? Not that we're not going to move forward with the opportunity that can affect the most people, because there's a subset of people who can't participate in the full experience. It's a matter of getting out the best possible thing that can accommodate the most amount of people, and then looking at how we can accommodate those who might have challenges associated with it.
Oh, I agree with that. I think the priority is the mass, and then you also have to consider the minority who cannot engage because of any particular reason.
But it's not that simple. I mean, there are a lot of people, all you need is one person who has a challenge accommodating it, speaking to a lawyer and saying, you're not accommodating me as appropriately. and the organization will just shut it down. It can be a very challenging thing to navigate.
Yeah.
Let's have a show of hands. How many people design for smartphones or design learning for use on smartphones within their organisations? Thank you. How many people work in organisations where their smartphone is used to monitor their performance?
Not many.
One, as far as I can see. Okay. Just interesting in terms of ideas. Questions on smartphones?
Over there, looking in the yellow.
Oh, yeah, lady back there, yeah?
Yes, we have a full app as well as a mobile optimized platform, full LMS. The question to me is, if you want to do the learning, you'll find the tool that makes it easy for you.
Sorry, do you want to?
But actually, even though everyone's got an app, 85% of people take the learning on a Windows computer with no speakers in the middle of a shop floor. So to get people engaged in learning, which do you value more? Something sexy like AR or VR, or an incentive?
So it's a no-brainer for me. It's the incentive. I think that to engage learners, you have to make it relevant to them. You have to make it appropriate and timely as well. It has to be, it's not just in case anymore. We know this. For years now, we've been talking about just-in-time learning, but I think it's also just for me and just enough. That's what we've got to do now. And those are the incentives for me.
Dave?
Yeah, I would completely agree in this case. I mean, the incentives are what drive it. Sometimes a unique technology might be an incentive in some ways. Like I mentioned the Walmart thing earlier, and part of the reason that training program is so popular is because people are intrigued by it in their organization, that they're intrigued by it. And one of the things they found that was very interesting, and then it is incentivizing people, is that it's not just people wearing the headset. There is this group experience of the people watching the people have the headset that is just, they're all eager to participate in it because they're all having so much fun. So it's what it means to give someone an incentive is a little bit broader than what that term in and of itself might imply.
Any other questions? Oh, lady down here.
To the front.
Yes.
Yep. Sorry. Sorry, hang on one second.
We have a mic
Sorry,
coming
got
right
a
there.
microphone, do the round. There we go. Super.
Do you see the use of any of the new technologies in learning of traditional solutions, like solution for accounting and stuff like this, or is it just for Walmart or firefighting and things like that? I think most of us are in traditional organization and teaching, basic solutions and applications.
Well, what's traditional varies. I mean, Walmart's situation might have been a unique thing to them, but retail is a very traditional training environment. It varies. There are lots of different applications that are out there. I mean, one of the things that I've been tracking in the VR and AR space is ways that you can make data more visual in those environments, which I can see huge applications. There's a VR application I've been playing with called CalcFlow, which I can see just some of the sample data sets that they have in there. They're accounting data sets that you can just kind of see how the visualization approaches it. Where I struggle with it a little bit is that's a really cool way to look at the data, and it's an interesting way. Is it solving a problem that I couldn't solve without that technology, or am I just looking at it in a really cool way? I tend to lean towards the latter, but it's still an application of it being used in that context.
Steve? I think, if I can cut across for a second, I think I think one of the challenges is what we do is we look for the silver bullet, we look for the technology will solve the issue, without necessarily considering, well, it's not just about that technical skill. I think what we need to do is to break what's the problem we're trying to solve here? Is it a people issue? Is it a personal issue? Is it a process issue? And actually look at the issue across those three lenses. If it's a process issue, can we solve it just through a fairly simple process change? Because then that's not a learning. That wouldn't necessarily be a learning issue. That would be something we can change through systemic process change. And actually, would we just be over-engineering a solution? My view would be to step back and say, should we be trying to solve it with technology, or are there other things that the technology would be a better solution for us, as opposed to approaching just that very specific activity and trying to change it with the tech?
I think you're right. The idea of over-specifying, engineering something to try and make it work is a huge issue, and I know organisations that do this a lot.
Yep.
Take the health service. Who's involved in the health service? Anyone involved in the health service? Yeah. So I was involved in nurse education for 15 years, and they overcomplicated the information technology systems by making them. They tried to make them user-friendly, but they were so clunky that nobody knew how to use them properly. And there was huge amounts of training that people had to undertake to actually learn how to use them effectively. And then, of course, because they were over-engineering that, they forgot that the patient sat there in the middle of it all. And the patient still needs the traditional care. They still need to have their blood pressure, temperature, pulse. They still need to be reassured, still need to look after the relatives and so on. So the technological solution is okay, but you've still got to think of the human.
Okay, I could sit and chat with these guys all afternoon, but unfortunately I can't because I've got other jobs to do, and I think you two guys have as well. So first and foremost, I would like to thank you two. It's been enlightening, and I'm going to be on your ears again even further. If we could just show appreciation for Dave and Steve, please.
Hello, mate.
And for you. Thank you.
Cheers, guys. You make my job so easy.